Hello everyone and welcome to my mandatory draft video for the week, and I just realized I forgot to put a "w" after I got a co-host, but here with me is the one, the only, LS Winkyface.
Me, I'm the VBL royalty right here.
VBL royalty, yep. And VBL royalty will help me talk about being a VBL dunce. You are actually in VBL though, right?
I am in VBL.
What's beeping?
I sometimes stalk it. I got an at everyone from there the other day.
That would be for the playoffs live watch, which I'm sure you watched with.
I did. Brackets not. Brackets, small brackets. I think that I had an okay season, built predominantly off of me being a Pokemon that has, a player that has fundamentally good Pokemon VGC instincts, rather than having drafted or built well. So of course I brought a player who has only ever drafted well in the history of the game, and in fact just helped their team draft a very incredible bunch of STC drafts. I have not at any point asked how involved you were, though I have seen all of the drafts. Mate, I carried the drafts because I would just draft when everyone was asleep and no one could tell me no.
Is that why? Is that why we went in 2013 round 1 Politoed into round 2 Gothitelle?
Okay, I said Politoed is broken and then fell asleep. The rest is up to not me.
Okay. I mean, it seems okay. It's just a very interesting combination of Pokemon. Also, the Gengar Haunter duo is muy caliente. But yes, putting yeah, because you are Dom Daniel, yeah.
I am. I made that logo in paint.
Is Daniel on your team?
No. I was trying to think of a funny Pokemon pun, and that's what I settled upon. Dom Daniel, back at it again with the white vans.
I always called it Domanatandru, but yes. For this season of Shelgun's Bay, we were the dunce. We were the Funko Pop of the Pokemon world. Also, I found this Salazzle on Google. It's credited. It's got the artist there. For some reason, the artist didn't watermark their Palafin, so it doesn't say it. But yeah.
No, I drew it.
I like the Palafin. It's very good art. Yeah. So I feel like I made a lot of mistakes in drafting, in trying to understand how the format would be paced, in trying to incorporate, I'd say to some extent BSP was something that I tried to incorporate because that was like a vanilla-ish format with a limited dex, though a much, I would say, less limited but lower power level dex than like a Series 1 VGC. And a lot of things that I had that worked together well on paper, and even somewhat well in practice, was super matchup oriented. So the first big issue I noticed is that my opponent really liked to bury the lead. By which I mean, Salazzle and Jolteon was pretty frequently the fastest, like the two fastest Pokemon in a matchup, or Jolteon was the fastest, and then they had like another one before Salazzle, and then Salazzle was the next fastest. But I had multiple matchups with the two fastest Pokemon in the matchup, which meant they were very good together, especially if Salazzle was the fastest, because Salazzle could click Acid Spray, and then Jolteon could click Thunderbolt, and then a Pokemon would die. That had one major issue. Based on the slideshow, what would you gather that issue is?
This funny Terra type that rhymes with pound.
Yep. Ground is really good Terra type in this format. Ground is really good. I'm in another league where I accidentally lucked into a better draft, and I think I went 7-1, and like half my weeks were just like clicking Terra Ground Earthquake, and that just winning. And it turns out having a lead that hard loses to that is not good.
What if we made Disquake, but we made it more annoying? And that's what Pokemon said when they pitched
Terra, yeah.
The Terra at the meetings.
But also, I couldn't Disquake, because I tried building it once with a Scarf Gabite and Terra Flying Jolteon. But it's much better to Terra into the ground type than to Terra into
not electric type.
Yeah.
It turns out using Tera for damage, as well as for a type that's actually good with your type, is good. And flying is okay with electric, though much better in combination. I guess not really, right? You do appreciate well electric. Electric is a good type. The main issue is obviously that both these Pokemon were frail, which meant that if they weren't Terraing into an immunity type, they just were taking a lot of damage. And even if my opponents weren't doing the Disc Quake, just the fact that they could do the Earthquake plus attack target either slot was bad. So it meant that my fairly good, powerful lead had a major flaw that the rest of my team did not accomplish well, because I had Gogoat and Flamigo and Lokix as my ground checks, none of which are particularly consistent or really love getting thrown in from the back, and Gogoat did not wind up having a particularly good matchup into any of the games, which is why I ultimately dropped it.
Not Gogoat, my homie.
He was the good old games of all time. But yeah, Terra Ground, as well as ground types in general, were a really rough matchup for my team in a way that I had not really expected. But I think the ground, like having access to Earthquake on a non-ground type, is insanely good in the current format. I didn't understand that going into draft. So having this really good core that had a fatal flaw that was worse in them but still bad for the rest of my team was not great. Also Bronzong. Bronzong is okay to switch in, but it doesn't fit necessarily well into teams that Jolteon and Salazzle.
Bronzong wants to go slow while those two want to go fast. That's my professional observation.
Yeah, I mean, if either of them were bulkier, it could probably work better, but they weren't. And I tried investing bulk on Jolteon, and I think that it wound up just dying or taking the amount of damage where it took 50%, like 55 instead of 75, but that's still 2 a KO either way, which was not great. And then Salazzle, I think the only time that Salazzle was like actually put to a damage point was when my opponent was intentionally trying to not get me down to Sash so that they could beat me with Pat's Dozo against Ferrat Bang. I think it's the only time that Salazzle was like Sash and not put to Sash / immediately KO'd. I think a few times I switched it into resisted hits because I do like using switch fodder, but yeah, most of the time Salazzle was not able to make use of bulk, including when on the rare occasions that I did Terra it.
Yeah, I mean, you did Terra it for damage quite often to poison, just to bang out some sludge bombs and stuff, I feel like, from memory.
Terra it once.
Okay,
no, twice. Well, sorry, I Terra it once into poison and once into ghost.
Okay, see, I wasn't wrong.
Yep. But I think that when it was Terra Poison / Terra Fire, half the time that was me just not wanting to put the thought into pick a good Terra.
That's the vibe.
And a lot of times, like, an issue that I have in my team with building was not thinking properly into getting a good Terra onto Pokemon, and by the time I gotten around to that, the rest of the flaws of my team, like I was, it was like my cross-div match in playoffs where I needed more than just better Terra options. So yeah, buried the lead. Now we're onto reactivity. I had 2 Pokemon that I would consider to be very good in draft currently, Palafin and Klefki, that I did not have the ability to use particularly effectively because I had a team that was predominantly these Pokemon are incredibly good reactive mons, but I had a very active team in terms of Salazzle, Lokix, Jolteon, Armarouge, to a strong degree. I think Bronzong is also a fairly active mon, at least in the current format. Eventually got Palossand, which is a Pokemon that was at least somewhat reactive, but yeah, it was a real issue having Pokemon that were predominantly active paired with a fairly reactive like top selection.
I mean, yeah, Palafin's Palafin, we all know what it does. It does well, but it needs its turnout in the back. And it kind of doesn't love being swapped out into like a Jolteon.
Yeah, I mean, when like I don't really have a great mon to switch it into. I think I definitely could have drafted differently. I definitely had other drafts where I felt like it was switched better. But like, you know, I've used it okay even in this, where it's done some stuff. It just has not had a great team for it, so I've been doing that mostly through luck more than anything else.
Through luck and brute force.
Through luck and just like having unpredictable Pokemon in the back. Like I think I like switched it into like Klefki and Bronzong, but I mean I know at least one game I switched it into Goodra and they had like clicked like Draco or Dragon Pulse into that slot and Goodra died.
Owie.
Obviously, the best time I used it was when I Choice Scarf Flip turned into my own Armarouge. But if I had Indeedee in the back, that would have been much better than it actually was. I won. Like, don't get me wrong, I won. But yeah, if you ignore the fact that I won, it wasn't that good. Yeah. Klefki is a really good mon, a really, really good mon, but I had a team that can only really use its setup sets effectively because the best Pokemon to benefit from screens was itself. Just super, super ground weak was an issue with Palafin, where it was very difficult to have a good lead next to Palafin, where they couldn't reliably target a move into that slot that would hit both Palafin and the Bond coming in neutrally. And before Palafin Terras, its bulk is not very good. Not Terra, Heroes, its bulk is not very good, which was a major concern. I also don't think I ever picked a good Terra type on Palafin, because the only time I used it Terra, I used it for Terra Water, and it was not that significant in that game.
Yeah.
Klefki Terra Grass and often had Terras, where I wanted to Terra it into a type that I did not bring that game.
That's the worst part, where you like bring it and then you're like, oh, this game's so free if I didn't bring X Terra type or if I had Y Terra type. That's like what my biggest annoyance has been this gen.
I mean, especially when I look at my Terras and then I notice that I haven't actually manually set Terras. That was particularly frustrating. I know that another month that's coming up, I had that issue where I had manually set Terras. But yeah, reactivity is a major issue. Klefki getting Trick Room is really good. I think, use it once, but I didn't have great Trick Room use. And I think that in my playoffs game against Steve, I basically lost because I had Trick Room instead of a different move, ideally Magnarize. Yeah. So yeah, reactivity was a major issue. These are good Pokemon, but not with the bones of the rest of the team, and they cost a lot of my points. So, Trick Room, what is it good for? I had two, besides on top of Klefki, two phenomenal Trick Room setters in Bronzong and Armarouge. They do share a lot of weaknesses, which was an issue. Obviously, if Bronzong is not heat-proof, is heat-proof, which I did want to run, or if it's heavy metal, which I did occasionally want to run, then I'm just absurdly weak to ground, when I'm already weak to ground with Bronzong with Levitate on the team. Armarouge is so crippled by its ground weakness. I think that I brought it twice. Once was the thing where I flip-turn memed into it, and the other time I Terra-flyinged it every single game, and it didn't do very much. Armarouge was basically impossible to bring, because I was so weak to all the types it was weak to, and it was very difficult to justify using it over Salazzle, when Salazzle was faster, and they were dying to the same double-ups.
Yeah, I mean,
I had like the worst Armarouge team ever, because that one's broken.
Armarouge is funny, but it does kind of need the right pieces around it to get it to work.
Yeah, you really need a good comp around it, and I just not have a team that suited it particularly well.
I mean, yeah, it's hard super early into a gen knowing exactly what the right archetypes for this and that are.
Yeah, well, I was like, oh, well, the Indeedee thing is overblown, but I think if I had Indeedee, it would be much better. Yeah, but so Palafin. With Palafin, I tried to draft Pokemon that resisted Grass and Electric, thinking that, oh, if I get Pokemon that resist Palafin's weaknesses, that'll be good because I can just switch into them. Not thinking about the fact that they can take advantage of Palafin's neutral moves. I did not do that with Armarouge, whereas if I had a team that resisted more of Armarouge's weaknesses, that mon is really good when you aren't dying to all the moves that get clicked into it. But I had like a pretty profound Ghost weakness, and then a solid ground weakness, and a rock weakness that was not super prominent, but it definitely felt annoying when Flamigo was my fighting type. So I really just had my steals, and then they could just take the same coverage against them.
and then like I struggled with Lycanroc Midnight, I remember, which is embarrassing. Also Dreadnought, both of them had solid positioning against me.
But Dreadnought is broken.
I mean, that's true. Dreadnought is really good. You should watch the video. You were on the Dreadnought video, right?
I know.
I was just making sure.
I was.
Luckily, no one brought Cloth. Otherwise, it would have been over.
Oh yeah, Cloth is the strongest rock type.
It is. But yeah, so I had Gabite and Gogoat as low tiers that should have been Pokemon that could function in Trick Room. I looked a lot at trying to think monsters that could replace Gabite in Trick Room, but that was very difficult. But I traded out Gogoat eventually for Palossand. I should have traded out like 3 weeks earlier. I talked to a few people about it, and they'd encouraged hesitance. But I just wasn't bringing Gogoat, and I would prefer to have a Pokemon that could abuse Trick Room when I had 3 really good Trick Room setters. Even though it does not help the Ghost and Dark weakness.
I mean, I kind of see the Gogoat vision with the Palafin like swapping into it, but
yes, the problem is Gogoat sucks.
Yeah.
Like, it just never had a matchup where it looked good. If it had a matchup where it looked good, then that'd be great. But it loses to Rain, it loses to the other Rain team, and then everything else was like I was weak to flying, and more in the sense of I couldn't kill flying types with anything but Jolteon, rather than actually being weak to it, because I think I was relatively neutral to it, and I had 2 very good flying resists as well as Jolteon. But outside of that, like if I was trying to position it with Palafin, then I was like already losing to the ability to run all 3 of my flying resists, and it just felt very difficult to position in a way that was good into it. Especially because flying resisted a lot of my damage, because I didn't have a ghost or an ice. Sorry, I didn't have a rock or an ice, just an electric.
You're
Which is
electric.
a very good offensive type. Yeah. But yeah, Flamigo, Gogoat, and Lokix were all my ground type checks, and they were all weak to flying, so flying types could Terra ground, and ground types could Terra flying pretty easily to kind of cover me, except for Bronzong, which just, yeah, having the Ghost and Dark weakness was an issue. I know people spam a lot of Terra Ghost against me. Bronzong, the only time I Terra'd it was when I'd forgotten to pick a Terra type, so I Terra Psychic just to not be weak to Steel's weaknesses. Never got to use Gabite or Gogoat. Gabite came to Mox twice, and both times I wound up not bringing it. One was a bulky Eviolite set, and the other one was an offensive Scarf set, and both of them didn't do enough damage and got killed too easily. Oh yeah, sorry, I should go back to the Jolteon. Jolteon Terra'd the most of all the Pokemon on my team. It Terra'd into Water, Fairy, and Dragon, and Terra'd into Water in 2 separate games. I don't think it's a particularly good Terra target, though the Fairy one hard-walled their Dragon Claw, Thunder Punch, Dragonite, which was good. But the damage is fine. You generally, I think, want to Terra it for Terra Blast. Yeah. So now we go to Sashay on over here with Flamigo and Lokix, who are both mons that individually are very good and can fit a role on a team. But together, I already had a Sash user in Salazzle, and like Salazzle was already taking away from Jolteon Sash and Armarouge Sash. That had these 2 Pokemon that were very difficult to bring without Sash.
Just run the Focus Band, the 10% one. That's like.
But that's only one item. I have like 5 Pokemon that want Sash. That's only like 2 slots, you know. So I think I round up running Choice, and then I round up running like type boosting items on them. Flamigo was an okay Pokemon. I think it made a lot of sense theoretically with Palafin, if you don't think about the fact that you need 2 other Pokemon actively to be able to set Palafin up. Which means that Flamigo is a 4th mon that is a dead slot, because you don't generally want to switch it into the Palafin slot. But like, yeah, Bulk Up Palafin is obviously strong, and it did okay in this league. But yeah, I think I Terra'd Flamigo once. I don't have it in my list, but I think I did Terra it fly once.
Big brave bird.
Yeah, that was definitely the idea. Yeah, but Lokix and Flamigo, both weak to flying, both weak to fairy, and both like key defensive resists to types that I was pretty weak to, which meant, but they're both very frail. Lokix, I think, is bulkier than Flamigo, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I definitely wish I'd had a different dark type on top of Lokix, which I did not.
I mean, with Flamigo, you didn't, like, you kind of were limited as well with your co-star options if you wanted to run that.
Yeah, I mean, and because I was weak to Ghost, people were forcing me to run Scrappy.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, these Pokemon are not taking each other's hits, except for Lokix taking Psychic. And they just not like great ground checks, and they both want Sash. They both do really good damage, but it's not like that was something I was like. People are like, oh, your team doesn't have immediate offensive threat, which is wrong. Like, most of my team was immediate offensive threat. The problem was I didn't have a really good way to transition that into a good build. I had a lot of mons that needed me to position very differently than what a purely offensive team would try and do. I didn't have a best way to I didn't have a good way to set up Tailwind, because Flamigo, I believe, was my only Tailwind setup, which was definitely an issue. Yeah, it just meant that I was in a really awkward position in a lot of matchups, which I shouldn't have been with a better team. But I think both these Pokemon were individually good. Both of them had decent games, though Flamigo less so. But Flamigo did almost win that playoffs game if it didn't get hit by Outrage, because Outrage is a funny move. I think Lokix ever Terra'd. I think I basically always ran a stab Terra on it that I just never clicked. But yeah, Focus Ash was a really good item that I had too many Pokemon that wanted to be able to use these Pokemon super like that, all that effectively. Also, First Impression is really annoying to try and fit when you want to run Protect. Which
I feel like First Impression is very matchup dependent.
I mean, I would have loved to bring it in the fourth or fifth or sixth move slot in many games, but yeah. And the damage is really good. Leech Life, U-Turn, and Throat Chop are all good. Sucker Punch was also difficult to fit, but it's also very strong. And Flamigo is just, like, good. But yeah, both these Pokemon found very difficult to splash into teams, because my team comps didn't really, like, there were too many Pokemon that were similar to this to be able to use them effectively. Yeah, so yeah, Sashay on over here. The Palace of Good and Tera-ble. So these are the two Pokemon that I thought consistently did okay when I bought them. To be fair, I only bought Palossand 2 games, but I also only picked it up in the second last week of the season. It terrored both of those games. It did okay. I mean, it didn't get the kill on Mordom with Life Orb, Stab, super effective Energy Ball, which sucked. But it otherwise was okay. It did well against Dan with Terra Dark to resist the their Terra Dark Claw, which is pretty good. Sub and dual stab on that mon is very strong if they have a good matchup, which they generally do. Goodra in the early weeks swept a lot, and then my opponent started predicting it on the right turns, and then it didn't perform as well, or they would be able to outmuscle it before it got the ability to acid armor up, which meant that I kept having matchups that were just too fast for me to be able to use Goodra reliably, which is a shame, because I do think it's a very good Pokemon, and when I was able to bring it, it performed generally pretty well.
I mean, Goodra is still pretty versatile. It does a lot of things.
It's versatile, but it's very difficult to ameliorate its weaknesses.
Yeah.
It Terra'd the second most with Terra Steel. No, I think it's the most actually. Terra Steel, Terra Water, and Terra Poison. Terra Poison didn't do anything, but the Terra Steel and Terra Water, I think Terra Steel happened twice. Both pretty effective Terra types. I think Terra Water was to spam Muddy Water against the Rain team that was weak to water. And then Terra Steel's
Rain team weak to water.
It's actually pretty common.
Yeah, I did it recently myself.
Yeah, because Pelipper is very weak to water with its bad special defense. But yeah, Terra Steel's very good with this mon. And Terra Poison was okay, but didn't really cut the mustard. But yeah, the problem is that it is either fast or slow, and I didn't have a team that because I didn't have access to Tailwind, I couldn't really use the fast, like Choice Specs or Life Orb variants of Goodra, which are very strong, particularly effectively, so I basically always was stuck with a defensive item, potentially Covert Cloak, potentially Assault Vest, potentially Leftovers, with it like wanting to do like Acid Armor and then put out damage, but then I also wanted Life Dew, and I wanted Protect, and I wanted Bulk Up, and I wanted Dragon Pulse and Muddy Water and Thunderbolt. So it was very difficult to get a Goodra set that I felt comfortable with, especially because it's a mon that I didn't want to feel forced to Terra, so it means that you don't want to run Terra Blast. But that would also be a difficult move to fit as well. So that was the main issue I had with Goodra, though I think it was a very good Pokemon. But yeah, I definitely wish I had subbed out Gogoat for Palossand earlier, and potentially Gabite for even just a different low-tier offensive option that is slow, even though there are not particularly good offensive slow options. Just having that extra depth would probably have been better than Gabite.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I think that I just didn't really have a way to, like, I didn't understand what Palafin did, and beyond that, I didn't understand what Armarouge did. And that caused me to have teams that were not able to use either of them particularly effectively. I think lack of, like, spending a lot of points on those two Pokemon and not being able to use them particularly effectively, and similarly with Klefki, I just was cruising off of, I either had a really good matchup for Jolteon and Salazzle, had a really good matchup for Goodra, or had an acceptably good matchup for Palossand or Palafin or setup Klefki, and then I was able to win off of just having like a team where setup spam could work.
What I'm hearing is this is your one get out of jail free card, and any other bad teams, it's no excuses.
I drafted four VGC teams at the same time, and only one of them worked. And it was the one that I had two starters in. Starters are broken? Confirmed?
I mean, they're fun mons.
The starters are really good. I mean, I didn't use Meowscarlet that much, but Scarlet was insane. But yeah, ultimately everyone, thanks Lucky for going on. I definitely think that, I think all the Pokemon I drafted are good, except Gogoat and Gabite. But I didn't spend a lot of points on them. I just wish I'd picked up Palossand earlier. I think all the Pokemon I drafted were individually good. I think Jolteon and Salazzle can work really well if you have a fairly good team into ground otherwise. Jolteon and Salazzle is a really good like lead option, because in the format before Paradox Mons, it was incredibly fast. As we're heading into Series 2 and Regulation C, it gets a lot worse, though, specifically because of the speed option, though the general concept of Acid Spray plus fast special attacker is good. You should probably be using Iron Moth instead.
Oh.
Yeah, ultimately, I thank everyone for watching. Get Electros or a Rotom. Like, just do it. It's like the best thing ever. My team that was magically good was the one where I had Electros and I ran like Scarf or Expert Belt and I won games. Yeah, thank you for watching. Please leave a comment down below about other things that you think I missed, that I wasn't doing well. Obviously, the general issue I had with building was not always intentionally setting terrors, which I think is definitely a mistake, and lost me a lot of games that I think could have been won if I'd had a good terror option and potentially a move that would have become stab with it. But yeah, please leave a like, subscribe, and you'll see more content from me in a few days.
Bye bye.